the public health charity that is delivering the CMCA funded Strategic Obesity Project. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. So in terms of the project, the key aim of this project is to establish reduction of overweight and obesity prevalence as a significant agenda item for all stakeholders across the Cheshire and Merseyside system. And this is a project which started in April 2022. We're trying to drive system connectivity across the sub-region, taking this upstream preventative approach to overweight and obesity. And we're engaged with stakeholders from public health, from NHS, from our voluntary sector, from planning, and indeed from the private sector as well. And after a year of quite significant insight gathering, we're now delivering some specific work streams, one of which is on planning and how can we use the planning system to try and intervene on healthier weight. So we have a food policy and planning lever work stream, which is facilitating collaboration between colleagues in public health, but also planning officers in Cheshire and Merseyside, really to try and develop more of a shared vision for spatial planning across the sub-region. And some of you may be familiar with the food policy and planning digital toolkit that we launched in March this year. We're engaging stakeholders across the sub-region to further develop this agenda, and we're looking at potential learning opportunities regarding the NPPF update, the new local plan process, and indeed the theme of today's webinar, the use of design codes to intervene in terms of better health and well-being, in particular in terms of healthier weight. Next slide, please. So in terms of today's agenda, we are going to hear firstly from our keynote speaker, Katia Still, who is going to give a presentation on the design codes for health and well-being guidance. And Katia is from Tybalt's Planning and Urban Design. We'll then turn to Matt Prescott from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, who's going to give us an overview of the Design Codes and Pathfinder programme. And we'll then hear two case studies, the first of which will be from Bradford, from Stephen Broadbent, and then another one of which will be from Cheshire West and Chester, from Charlie Cullen. And then if we do have time, we've got a fairly packed agenda, we'll hopefully have time, around about 5 minutes or so, for questions to speakers. Next slide, please. So just in terms of some housekeeping, please introduce yourself in the chat if you wish, and make sure your microphones are turned off unless you're speaking. A member of our team will raise their hands just to give speakers a 1-minute warning, and hopefully there will be that opportunity for questions after our 4 main presenters. We're recording the webinar today and we'll be sharing that recording with attendees and others who couldn't make the meeting along with the presentation. So a huge thanks in advance to all of today's speakers for both preparing and delivering the presentations. It's hugely appreciated by us. And I'm going to turn now to our keynote speaker, Katia Steele from Tybalt's, who's going to give us an overview of the design codes for health and wellbeing guidance. So Katia, many thanks. And if you could share your screen, then it's over to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and nice to see you all. Let me just find the presentation. So that hopefully you can see all of that. Well, as Matt said, I am from Tybalt's. We are planning and design consultancy working with public and private sector on either creating policy or kind of bringing forward developments with a focus on health and well-being. And recently we have worked with the Quality of Life Foundation, TRUD and TCPA to create this guide, which is out there. I mean, if it works, the QR code should take you to a site where you can kind of then download it. And these groups, we came together because we believe that actually design codes are a really important tool I mean, we all know the government wants to deliver 1.5 million homes, and we know that the environmental factors are one of the greatest health determinants. So therefore, it is incredibly important that those 1.25 million homes are actually creating the healthy environments that our communities need. I mean, we also know that the most deprived communities have the poorest environments, which is exacerbating their kind of health impact. There have been, over the last few years, there have been a lot of talk about in policy and PPF updates about the design codes. We understand, and policy is going that way, that they are here to stay as an important planning tool, and really as a tool to kind of bridge the gap between high-level strategic policy that sits in the local plan and then the more site-specific or kind of specific requirements for the region. So they are and they remain a really important tool to kind of come down from the strategic level to a very practical implementation. This is one page from the guide. The guide goes through movement, nature, place, identity, sustainability, all the criteria and characteristics that are set out within the National Design Guide. And it provides practical coding requirements and examples, but also gives further reading and actually specific outcomes, health outcomes. So it is a guide to kind of give ideas about what really could be embedded within codes. So just briefly, an overview of what a design code is. It is supposed to be a simple, concise set of requirements that provide some specific parameters. It uses text as well as graphics. Generally, codes should be quite visual and not just reams and reams of text. Design codes can be for districts or areas. They can be site-specific or they can be thematic. And I think over the last few years, we've seen some changes, and I think Matt will come on to that potentially with the pathfinders. That a couple of years back, Office for Place was really saying that code requirements should be answered by yes and no answers and be very, very specific. More recently, I think we are seeing guidance that codes can include elements of guidance and that there's much more flexibility to really tailor them to your own policy context, to the site, to the themes, and also the areas and your issues. And I think that is something that was really positive change, because Stephen may know from the experience how hard it is to write yes, no answers in a code, and that often development management officers aren't entirely comfortable with that approach, and you need quite a lot of evidence to actually prove the yes and no answers. So in terms of health, what can a code do? For example, we know that there's a lot of obesity, people are not getting enough activity. I mean, recent example was 52% of children don't get enough physical activity. A design code obviously can't make people go out, but it can provide the basis for it. So it can ensure that the walking routes are safe, are accessible, are attractive. So it can promote that activity. It can provide the play and the sports facilities. But it can also look at the high quality housing, setting specific size standards or quality standards for specific homes. So it can kind of take the analysis that every council has, and that is within the public health teams, and translate that into practical outcomes that can then improve the environment for the communities, existing or future communities. What can be coded? Generally things that are decided within the planning, within development management. So it's about the physical environment, the land use, physical and spatial issues, development types, and kind of how to approach specific sites, for example, from a master planning point of view. It can also code the process that applicants have to go through, but it can't really control elements like management and maintenance issues, for example. So it is really elements that relate to the physical environment of a place and the process of how to determine those elements. The National Model Design Code sets out a process. Number one, analysis, looking and learning about the place, the area, or the theme that you have decided to code for. Then it is very clear you need to kind of establish a vision. What do you want to code for? That is really critical, because if the aim, the objectives aren't clear, then codes really struggle to kind of be robust and defendable and clear. And then the third step is really the draft code. So taking an example, for example, the kind of analysis shows that there's a large percentage of obese community, or kind of in low income and deprived areas, for example, in a certain part. And then the vision is to address that inactive lifestyle, kind of encourage people to move. There might be low car ownership in the area. So it's really kind of looking at what are the triggers, what are the elements that we can address. And then in the code, in the third step, is to ensure safe and pleasant active travel routes, encourage walking and cycling, where possible, creating streets that are attractive to walk along. Even if it is a short distance, not everybody needs to walk long distances or get on a bike. It is really about encouraging this small day-to-day activity as well. And the coding process itself is really an important part of it. So the code at the end is obviously a development management control tool, but it is the process that brings together lots of different people. It should involve the community, kind of align with planning policy, bring about public health colleagues, highway colleagues, community engagement teams. So everybody really should be sitting together at a table and decide what's important, and then kind of use the code to put that pen on paper in a way. And I think all these different groups also need to be brought into it. It is incredibly hard to ensure that a code is actually effective and is being used if, for example, the highway authority isn't signed up to it, and it can create kind of later conflicts. So the process of doing the code, as well as the code itself, is really a tool for cross-sector collaboration. And I think we all know that health cuts across everything. So it can't be looked at in silo only by one department. Everybody needs to be involved in that. And the guidance I mentioned is really setting out some of those practical ways of doing that. Movement is a big one. Everybody knows how important it is in terms of the activity. And it is really to create that environment to kind of allow people's behaviors to shift. It is not about forcing people to create a different lifestyle or leave the car at home. It is about setting out the positives and creating that environment that encourages people to work, get to work, for example, in a kind of active transport, walking, cycling. And if we address that, then there's lots of other good examples out there. It's better for your mental health, air quality, etc., etc. So one element within a code can actually impact on a lot of different health outcomes and determinants. One example I want to, briefly reflect, and this is a site-specific code. Actually, there are 3 codes for this development. It's a new town in Cambridgeshire. It was identified as the NHS Healthy New Town at the time. And the objective was really to set a code and a master plan that creates nudge and pull factors to allow people to choose positive lifestyles. And there was particular around to address kind of obesity issues. That was the kind of overarching theme. But as part of that, it was very clear that we needed to think about everybody in the community. So it's the children on one hand, it's the elderly on the other, and also kind of looking at the less able people. So one of the examples, for example, is on this particular development, we looked at how can we create activity for everyone. I mean, often policy as well is weighted towards sports, and we often talk about sport fields and football fields and rugby fields, but actually they're used only by a very small percentage of the population. So we tried to think about it differently, of like taking away some of the formal sports fields and creating what we called informal open space. And that is like on the picture shown, that might be a table tennis, that might be, you know, the area to walk or a jogging trail. So all the smaller elements that are freely accessible, free of charge for everybody in the community, whether you're part of a, you know, sports club or not. So these were slight tweaks that we did on this particular development that were then embedded within the design code, and really focusing on that day-to-day activity. I mean, on this page, the picture shows 2 primary schools within this new development, and all the active travel routes that lead to those schools. And each school is tied into the wider surrounding by car-free routes, so that kids, when they grow up from an early age, can really learn how to go to school and kind of get into a habit of that active travel. As an example of a site-specific code, which this one is, I mean, all those highlighted topics relate to active travel. So it is about creating attractive streets as well as good quality routes. But it is also about thinking about how we handle and manage the car. It is about integrating public art and a lighting strategy as well, so that people feel safe to use these routes. Doesn't matter if it's at night or daytime, in the rain or in the sunshine. So, I mean, today with this weather, everybody will know how shading, how important that is. So really thinking about all the different elements. And these are other examples of, on the left-hand side, that's plan just showing strategic connectivity. Again, sometimes it is really small elements that if a development, and we've seen a lot of them in recent years, hopefully not so many in the future, built around cul-de-sacs. If there is a cul-de-sac for a road, it doesn't mean it has to be one for walking and cycling. So making sure those connections come forward, connections to the open space, to the play facilities, to the schools, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, that is a code that looks at how a street needs to look, where we have our cycle route, our footpath, the carriageway, and really setting the kind of overarching principles. And again, it could be for an area, it could be for kind of a whole district, it could be for a site. So it's really tailoring what we need and what we mean for those different codes, and tailoring it to exactly what you need to know, your local area. One of the other elements is to look at healthy food. And there are different ways of doing it. On an area-wide code, one could go into controlling fast food and takeaway shops around schools, setting a certain radius, kind of, you know, within X meters from a school. You can't have these uses, or you can say not more than X number on a high street, for example. You need to make sure you have evidence for it. I mean, there is a lot of health evidence and lots of studies that can be drawn on. I think one element to remember is also that the code doesn't need to reinvent everything. There is lots of research out there. There are a lot of studies. Other codes might have already addressed these issues, which have kind of an evidence base that you can draw on. But it's also quite important to think about what sits in the code and what sits in the local plan. Sometimes we find clients want to almost write policy through the coding process. That creates issues, potentially issues later on with its kind of with the robustness and how you can defend the code. So it's really important to see where your code sits and what are the words you're using to describe these coding requirements. On a site-specific code, you would, for example, you could look at the location of allotments, community orchards. So where are they located within the development? How accessible are they to the different communities and different residents? I mean, on the right-hand side, again, that is a plan from Nosto from the healthy, what is it? Sorry, it's a youth play and healthy living strategy. It's always a bit of a long one, but that really looks at open space, orchards, allotments, play streets, play on the way, and brings everything together to create that environment where people can live healthy lives. And then just as a final example is, again, going back to the guide, public space brings a lot together, is kind of key driver for health and well-being. It is the open spaces being accessible, and the close proximity of people in the community. It is making sure that children can access it, and there's not a big road between the residents and the open spaces. But it is also about some of the really small elements like the benches and allowing seating opportunities, particularly for the adult population. Having drinking fountains, particularly with our hot weather, making sure that people stay hydrated, but also having, public toilets, etc., because all those elements ensure that everybody in the community can go out and partake in community life. And with this, this is a very quick overview, and I'm conscious of time. So therefore, I want to leave you with that. But I'm happy to answer all sorts of questions and also send you the guide afterwards if you can't find it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Katja. And that was a really great overview. And thank you for looking at some of those key areas for us, in particular around physical activity, active travel, and also in terms of food systems as well. We will circulate the link to the guide in terms of the follow-up from today's webinar. I'm going to move over now to Matt Prescott from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Matt's good enough to join us today for a short presentation on design codes and the National Pathfinder programme. So Matt, if you want to share your screen, many thanks and over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. Hopefully you can see that all right.
That's good. Thanks.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, so I'm Matt Prescott. I'm a team lead within the design and placemaking team at MHCLG. And for the past couple of years, certainly up to the end of last year, I was overseeing the Design Code Pathfinders program, which many of you may be responsible for. And if not, today I'll be giving you a bit of an overview of what that program was and some of the lessons we learned from it. First of all, I'll just say I had to cut this presentation down a fair amount in the interest of time. So big thanks to Katja for covering a lot of the things that otherwise I would have loved to have covered around what codes are, how they can be used, the coding process. So that's really helped to set some very, very important context here. So very grateful for that. What I will be looking to cover today, before getting onto the Pathfinders program itself, is very briefly the sort of design policy context that we have at the moment. And then at the end, I'll just conclude with some of the next steps we have for design policy within the department. So to kick off with design policy and guidance. So good design and placemaking has experienced elevated status in national policy and practice in recent years. So the NPPF Chapter 12 explains how design should influence plan making and decision taking. That makes clear that development that is not well designed should be refused, especially where it fails to accord with national and local design policy. And it also encourages that local planning authorities should prepare design codes and guides in their local areas to maximise clarity around design expectations. And this national design guidance should be used to guide planning decisions locally in the absence of local codes and guides. So the design guidance itself at the moment comprises the National Design Guide, which sets out 10 characteristics of well-designed places, and the National Model Design Code, which sets out the process for effectively implementing those characteristics locally through a design code and a set of design requirements. We also have the Design Process and Tools PPG, which gives some guidance around integrating design and plan making tools to support with decision taking, such as design review panels, and also the role of community engagement in the coding process. I wanted to highlight here as well, since the new government came in a little over a year ago, in their manifesto, in addition to obviously their aspirations around 1.5 million homes over the course of the Parliament, they did reiterate the importance of design quality, which was fantastic to hear, and stated that exemplary development should be the norm and not the exception. And so with this in mind, we are currently in the process of updating our national design guidance. I think appreciating, as Katja highlighted as well, that different approaches and different tools might be appropriate at different scales of design and design coding. So moving on now to the NMDC pilot and the Pathfinders program. So the NMDC pilot is what we began with back in 2021. And this was very much to work with a small group of authorities, 14 in total, to test the process and the content of the National Model Design Code to see how it might work in a variety of different local contexts. This program evolved into the Design Code Pathfinders program, where we were able to work with a larger group of 25 areas, including planning authorities and 4 neighbourhood planning groups, to ask them to prepare design codes for their area in line with the national design guidance and primarily the National Model Design Code. And through this program, we gave them flexibility to choose the scale at which they wanted to code. So a number of authorities went down the authority-wide coding route, others site-specific, others sort of area-based or neighborhood-based codes. And we also gave them flexibility to code for the design matters that were of greatest interest to them. So as highlighted there, some focused on streets, some on new extensions, but generally speaking, of course, everyone was interested in raising the overall design quality of development within their areas. The Design Code Pathfinders program concluded in 2024 following what we were calling phase 3, where we were able to work with most of these authorities just to go a little deeper into their experiences with design coding. So we had 3 key work streams through that work. One around refining their design codes, so appreciating the importance of testing, how they look to remove certain requirements while strengthening other ones, improve use of visuals, and also optimizing the usability of their codes. We had a work stream around implementation and monitoring. So this was appreciating the role of training, how codes have been adopted and integrated within decision-making processes, and also how the performance of codes is being tracked, and I guess ultimately what the impact of those codes is, at least in terms of the planning applications process. And we were also interested through that latest phase of the work around the opportunities of digital, with a lot of Pathfinders keen to explore how digital could be used to optimize the value of their codes, how easy it is to access, and then starting to appreciate some of the barriers that were faced locally around implementing digital in the design coding process. I think a lot of authorities at this point were getting to the point of actually adopting their codes, which was key to really appreciate those impacts and really to help fill a bit of an existing gap in resources, which didn't sort of look into the actual implementation stage of design coding. Very quickly, I just wanted to highlight a couple of the codes which have been adopted. So you've got the Chatham Centre Design Code in Medway and the A23 Great Street Code in Reigate and Banstead. And I think that will be of particular interest to this group, given some of their work towards supporting health and well-being through their code. So the Medway Code, adopted in June of last year, aims to support the high street through a modal shift towards more suitable methods of transport for a city centre, so prioritising pedestrians and delivering public realm improvements, including play spaces such as doorstep play and play on the way. Reigate also adopted last June through consultation with their communities, have identified challenges around health and obesity and the need to support healthier lifestyles. So they wanted to help build incidental exercise into daily life through their design requirements, as well as promoting access to health-related facilities such as leisure, healthcare, food, and nature. Moving now on to some of the general lessons we learned from this Pathfinder program. I think first and foremost was that the work through the Pathfinders program was really helpful in boosting the status of design within authorities. So it was bringing teams together to form collaborative and complementary approach to design, including among policy teams, development management, and elected members. One of the challenges that authorities certainly faced in the first instance was really identifying the level of detail that they should be going into for their codes. So what we sort of appreciate from this was the importance of engaging with decision makers to understand the day-to-day challenges that authorities face on design, and to help focus the code to have the greatest impact on sort of the development that was coming forward. So one example I typically lean on was one of our Pathfinders, Gedling, undertook a bit of an evidence gathering exercise beforehand, where they identified that 97% of their applications were received in the period between 2019 and 2023 were for small developments and for householder applications. And of these, analysis of refusals found that 79% of the small sites applications and 76% of the householder applications were based upon design-related grounds. So they were refused for reasons relating to design. So quite a powerful case there to focus their design requirements on addressing those particular issues. Another big issue we found as well was around ultimately writing implementable codes. So similar to what Katya said earlier about the appropriate use of language, musts, setting parameters, being very precise and definitive, and ultimately where possible, allowing for binary decision making, that being for both applicants and for development management officers. And I think really stressing that code should be written for the reader and not for the writer. So we've discouraged the use of non-committal language such as must demonstrate and must consider, which can lead to quite a bit of ambiguity about what's actually required. And also noting, Katya, what you highlighted around development management officers and how they've perhaps at the start had some apprehension about the more binary approach. But what we're starting to appreciate through Pathfinder experience is it's actually really building confidence among development management officers once the codes start to bed in and they start to appreciate the results. Codes also, in terms of functionality, we want to make sure that they're not too big, and testing was a critical part of this process, just to make sure that users were able to identify relevant material nice and early. And then obviously the value of digital codes there as well in improving that process. Limited thought had been given to monitoring, and I think this largely reflects a gap in existing guidance, which we're hoping to address. But also was quite interesting is in terms of implementable codes is where it is very easy to understand what is and what isn't required. That will inevitably support with monitoring and appreciating how well a code is performing. And I think finally on this, I just want to stress that a lot of the codes which are coming forward are having a very positive impact, and that's even in advance of adoption, with many Pathfinders reporting that their codes were improving the quality of what's coming into the system, crucially. In the interest of time then, I'll just speed through this. There were some more resources that were prepared by the Design Council, and I can share a link to this, giving some information about the role of implementation monitoring, making codes usable. And then finally, just to conclude on our next steps, a few things worth highlighting. As I said, updating the national design guidance is our primary focus at the moment, and a lot of that will be reflecting on the findings we're taking from the Pathfinders programme and our wider engagement. We're also interested as government in exploring and testing the role of digital and what we can do to support authorities to prepare and present their codes in a digital way to support with implementation. And finally, we're also looking into some sort of general research around design quality, looking at sort of benchmarking what good design is, but then also looking at the long-term impacts of design codes and appreciating how and where they're starting to bring about benefits in planning decisions and ultimately development outcomes. And I think with that, that's me. My email address is there if anyone is interested in contacting me or has any particular questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. That's fantastic. A really great overview. And if there's any links that you want to share with us that we can disseminate further, that'd be great. So I'm now actually going to turn to one of those Pathfinder sites for our first case study, which is from Bradford Council. I'm going to turn to Stephen Broadbent, who's a planning officer with City of Bradford Metropolitan District Council. So Stephen, over to yourself, and if you could share your screen, many thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Right, so yeah, I'm Stephen Broadbent. I'm a planner in our landscape design and conservation team, and I'm going to talk to you about our emerging design code for new homes and streets. Just a bit of brief context about Bradford. We're a large, fast-growing district, a very young population, very diverse in terms of our communities, settlements and landscapes. We've got big challenges in our urban areas around things like deprivation, air quality and health, particularly childhood health. There's a need for thousands of new homes over the next few years, and delivering healthy and sustainable forms of urban living is a big focus for us. I just want to say a little bit about how our planning and public health teams work together and the background behind that. It dates back to 2017 and our participation in something called the Design in the Public Sector programme, which involved a series of day-long workshops facilitated by the Design Council, attended by key staff from both departments, where we really sort of honed down and defined what our common priorities were. And this also led to us working with Born in Bradford, which is a major research programme tracking the lives of thousands of Bradfordians, working with University College London, and including looking at the links between the built environment and health, particularly child health, so very relevant to the work we're doing. And one of the outcomes from that work was this document, the Homes and Neighbourhoods Guide to Designing in Bradford, which was adopted as SPD in 2020, and Public Health were instrumental in sort of from the beginning in terms of shaping that document with us. And as a result, the SPD has a focus on health, including just picking out some priorities there, things like green streets, doorstep play, clutter-free streets and pavements. Again, drawing on the research from Born in Bradford that I referred to earlier about what's important and needed in the city to improve health. And overall, that's been helping to improve the quality of design in the district. But also we've still got challenges in that respect in terms of delivering the green, healthy, inclusive spaces we want to see, particularly in deprived urban parts of the district. And it's a lot of things feeding into that, sort of a cocktail of the demand for large family homes, high densities, requirements around car parking and bin storage, highway standards, maintenance budgets. All that just makes it difficult to achieve these green, healthy places that we want to see. So we saw the design code as an opportunity to have a deeper dive into those issues. And so when we saw the chance to be part of the Pathfinder programme, our proposal was to focus on new urban housing, to deliver these denser but also greener, healthier and better quality housing developments that are also viable and functional, and just being sort of really specific about what we want to see in that regard. So we appointed a consultant team to do this work with us. That was led by Katja and the team at Tibbles. We had a multidisciplinary team that also included skills in things like community engagement, street design and viability appraisal. And in terms of the process we followed for the code, that was based on the 3 stages set out in the National Model Design Code of analysis, vision and code guidance. And I'm just going to talk through some of those in a bit more detail, just picking out key elements from each stage. So at stage 1, the analysis, we did a large public survey online and had lots of responses to that. And in terms of the top priorities that people wanted to see in new development, they identified as green streets as number 2 on that list, which was quite interesting. And these 3 pictures are what people picked as the sorts of places they'd most like to see more of in Bradford. So again, it's building on that narrative of sort of green, healthy, inclusive, child-friendly spaces. And in stage 2, the vision. So for the engagement at this stage, we went into had more in-depth workshops with key groups. And I've just highlighted in yellow there some of the most relevant ones to this topic. We had community conversations in person with hard-to-reach groups that were really well attended. We had a young people survey, which was perhaps a little bit less successful. But we also had a youth and health expert group, which included Born in Bradford and their partners at University College London that I referred to earlier, but also sort of newer regeneration programs in the city called Jump and Better Start, Better Place, which we're looking at putting that research into practice and delivering spaces for children and young people from toddlers up to teenage girls, and working closely with our landscape design and conservation team to design and deliver those spaces with sort of fun, playful spaces that were also didn't cost that much and easy to maintain and robust as well. And that work's helped to inform the vision in the design code, of which making life healthier and happier is right at the forefront there of our objectives, and also the detail of the code guidance as well, which I'll talk about now, how we've organised our code guidance. It's by scales of development, so starting up at the overall neighbourhood scale, then down to the scale of the street, then parking, then what we've called the transition zone, which is sort of the bit between home and street, the front gardens and the boundaries, and then the scale of the home. And I'm just going to show you some example sort of page spreads from each of those to give an idea of the sorts of issues we're picking up. So starting at the neighbourhood, that includes requirements for nature, urban greening and play, including features like doorstep play on the way, and playlets, which are drawn from that work I talked about earlier by the regeneration programs Jump and Better Place, that can demonstrate what works where, that we've got that experience. Then at the scale of the street, it's looking at requirements for things like green and blue streets and inclusive streets. Just sort of really drilling down into how do you design a street to ensure that it has things like street trees and rain gardens as part of it, and that the cars don't end up, the pavements don't end up with cars parked all over them. How do you design streets? And then to support that, requirements around car parking, how do you accommodate that? Also the things like the boundary treatments and the setbacks from the street of homes. That's important in terms of creating attractive environments for healthy lifestyles, and also requirements about internal space, again drawn on the research for things like indoor play and storage for families. So just finally then, our current position, so that our code's still in draft form. We are coordinating it with our emerging local plan, which is due for submission next year. That's around sort of the content, the relationship with the local plan policies, the format of it. It could be part of the local plan or separate. We're still leaving our options open, and it's just given us a bit more breathing space to actually test and refine it, drawing from new projects we've got going on in the city and the way they can influence the final output. So that's it from me.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. That's fantastic. That really brought a lot of that to life, actually. I definitely want to kind of follow up in terms of some of that work around the Jump and Better Place work. That was really interesting. Thanks for that. And then finally, I'm going to turn to Dr. Charlie Cullen, who is a Senior Planning and Urban Design Officer with Cheshire West and Chester Council. And Charlie's going to give us an update in terms of their work to date in terms of drafting a design code for Cheshire West and Chester. So Charlie, over to you. Many thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so I'm based in the development management team at Cheshire West and Chester Council. Can everyone see that okay?
That's fine, Charlie.
Brilliant. So yeah, I mean, similar to Bradford in some ways, Cheshire West is quite a fairly large and quite a diverse borough. So you know, there's a big challenge with design codes really. We're trying to do a lot you know, with different character areas and different settlements. So there's, you know, there's some in terms of the different settlements, there's different pockets of deprivation. There's some quite affluent towns. You know, there's a lot of heritage assets. So I think it's fair to say, and others will have experience of this, there's a big challenge with design codes when you've got quite a lot of variation in the borough. So we're working with Create Streets, who some of you likely have heard of. They're a kind of social enterprise design consultancy who are doing a few design codes. Their kind of core philosophy is about gentle density and creating more walkable, more beautiful places. And a kind of slightly unique thing about our design code is we're doing it with highways. So our current street design guide, which is what's used to set the adoption standards at Cheshire West, dates from 1996. So it's almost as old as I am, and it's, as you can imagine, it's you know, there's some quite dated thinking in there in terms of creating car dependent places. You know, not promoting permeability and a lot of the things that that Katia talked about, really, in terms of the kind of development we should be, the kind of places we should be creating. So you know, quite a key diagram really is the inverted user hierarchy with pedestrians at the top and private vehicles at the bottom. And that's a kind of a key, it's been a key driver from the beginning to work with highways and collaborate with them internally, because ultimately, you know, highways have a lot of power in terms of adopting, you know, setting the standards for what streets can be adopted. And streets, you know, there's a tendency to see public spaces as parks and roads as roads, and actually streets should be part of the public realm, you know, and cars should come last, as I say. So working with highways on that is really important, and as a unitary authority, that's something we've been able to do. So the challenge of that is design codes are already very large and complex documents, and that adds to that. But hopefully there's some big opportunities there. So our vision, I won't read it all out, but it's you know, about promoting prosperity and health, active travel, well integrated communities, sustainability, and beauty in the architecture and the streets. You know, to talk about, again, it comes back to a lot of what Katia said, really. So thank you for setting that narrative up, but about, you know, avoiding car dominated places. And from Cheshire West and Chester Council, you know, didn't have a 5-year housing land supply about 10-15 years ago, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the developments of that time, that we're now looking back to when we're again in a time when we haven't got a 5-year supply, and we're experiencing huge pressure on housing growth. So this is a local centre from one of the large developments where it very much feels like a place that you drive to rather than walk to, and the kind of public realm around it doesn't feel like somewhere that you would necessarily be that incentivized to spend time. And then another one is, you know, looking at some fairly recent developments in the borough. just to create much more, much greener, higher quality streets and places, really. That example is one where, we're looking at this through a health lens, and that's, to me, that's clearly not a street that would encourage someone to go for a run or a bike ride or whatever it is. And actually just completely lacks, even if someone did want to green up their frontage, it's that, just in the way that's been designed, it's not, the scope isn't really there. So similar to a lot of what Stephen said about what Bradford are aiming to do in terms of parking being a big challenge, and trying to build that into the code to avoid places like that, basically. Another key objective is to make places more characterful and place specific, and just looking at two examples. The one on the left is in the centre of Ellesmere Port, very close to this train station, in quite an urban kind of industrial context. And the one on the right is in true Cheshire rolling countryside, kind of very rural context. But both of them, if you're in those housing developments, you feel like you're in the same place, and you actually don't feel like you're in Cheshire West. You feel like you could be anywhere in the country. So we've got five chapters based on the kind of structure that's set up by the National Design Guide, which are greenery, movement, public space, built form, and identity. I know it's been kind of talked about on this call, where there's a bit of a shift away from the more I guess prescriptive, very specific way of doing coding, but we've restructured it so that we've got must, shoulds, and could. So an example must would be existing significant healthy trees must be retained, and then going down to with shoulds in the middle, and going down to coulds, which is kind of what's been said, really, but including best practice guidance that gives development management officers the confidence and to negotiate amendments of things like green roofs and living walls, which they can't really be a must, because it'd be unlikely that we'd be able to say we're going to refuse planning permission if someone doesn't do a green roof. That might be the case in some contexts, but good to have those things in there as well. With quite a diverse borough, as I've said, which Cheshire West is, area types are really important, and there's the 10 that the National Model Design Code gives, that sets up. So we've got 5. We've got city centre, local centre, and high street, urban neighbourhoods, suburban, and village. So for me, they're a really key tool in avoiding all developments feeling the same, like those, regardless of their context, like those example I showed earlier. And ultimately, if we're currently working on a new local plan, the idea would be that if you've got a large site allocation of 1,000+ dwellings, you'd actually have various area types within that to avoid a kind of homogeneous low density character, and you'd actually have you'd have a kind of denser core potentially, and more achieve more out of the site. So we did a public consultation, probably fairly similar to Bradford in a way, where we started out online. We had quite a good response from the online consultation. So again, green streets were very popular. I'm conscious I'm coming to the end of my time limit. I've got a lot to run through still, but and heritage was something people were very keen to protect. And then the kind of places that our current design guide probably promotes, like those examples, those lower examples, were something the public were very keen to for us not to do any more of, basically. So yeah, we also did an in-person public consultation. Our online platform kind of showed us the places where we had a high level of engagement, and they were actually some of the smaller towns in the borough. And that's often the way with planning, where certain communities engage with consultation more than others. So we tailored our in-person consultation to kind of balance that out, and went to some of the places where we didn't have such a good response from the online consultation. I'm conscious I'm probably at the end of my time there, but I would just
one more
reiterate.
minute, Charlie. You've got another minute.
Okay, thank you. I would definitely reiterate what Matt said about just the process of my role is urban design officer in the council within the development management team, and just the process of doing a design code has massively raised the profile of design within the planning department at Cheshire West, and it's been a really positive thing where to get people excited about design. And you know, a development management officer working on a major housing scheme faces a lot of challenges, but one of the things they can really feel proud of is, you know, driving past it in 5 years or whenever it is when it's built, and actually feeling like it's a high quality place, and design codes are the key to that. So I would just reinforce what was said there.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Charlie.
Thank you.
That was really helpful to have that more local perspective in terms of one of our councils from Cheshire West and Chester. We do have a few minutes for questions, and there's a question that's come through from Andrew Ascroft. Andrew's asking, how much influence does a design code have if it is not incorporated into local plan policy? So is there anyone who wants to potentially answer that? Just come up online in terms of any SWs. Matt.
Yeah, hi there. And good question, Andrew. I've sort of been looking at this and thinking how I might respond to it. And there's, I think, a couple of things to note. I mean, in a practical sense, you've got things around, you need a policy hook in a local plan before you can bring forward, you know, a design code anyway, especially as an SPD, which a lot of our pathfinders have been doing. And of course, an SPD is a material consideration, but will need to be balanced against other considerations as well in decision taking. So I think from a weight point of view, you know, that's where it sits in the decision-making framework. What I'd like to actually highlight is when you say influencer in your question, I think that is quite different. And what we're starting to appreciate from the pathfinders is that these SPDs are coming through and they're actually having quite measurable impacts on development management confidence in, you know, negotiating with applicants, but also actually refusing applications or requesting that certain amendments are made. And then, of course, it's also, as I suggested, elevating the quality of what's going into the system. So it's giving that desirable clarity to applicants about what is expected in order to ultimately, you know, to get the grant of planning permission. So from a weight perspective, it's a material consideration, but actually we're finding so far that the influence that these codes are having perhaps far exceeds the weight that they may have been anticipated to have. Of course, when it comes to things like planning appeals, that will be a really interesting test case as authorities start to get challenged perhaps on some of their design codes, and it's just something we'll need to keep under review with them.
It's very helpful, thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt, and thanks for the question, Andrew. I actually had a question for both of our local authority colleagues. We've got quite a lot of people from public health background on the call today. And I was just wondering, what might be helpful for you that public health might be able to do in terms of your design coding process? Is there anything that public health could contribute more, or is there something that you might potentially ask them of? I'm just interested to get that perspective whilst we have public health colleagues on the call.
I mean, I can come in here.
Great, Stephen. Thank you.
I mean, from our perspective, it was really crucial having the sort of the background I gave to how planning and public health work together at the beginning of my presentation. That was very much instigated by public health colleagues when they became integrated into the council around 10 years ago. They were very keen to start working with planning and to push the health agenda, and that's having that sort of real interest in the work we do from another department has been sort of crucial to a lot of the work we've been doing around the design guide, the design code, and also the the spaces I was showing as well, the actual landscape design work we've been doing that's feeding into that process. So for me, it's crucial that there's that good relationship there, and for public health colleagues to sort of seek to get involved in planning and try to influence it.
Thanks a lot for that, Stephen. That's really helpful. Charlie, is there anything that you might want to contribute on that?
Yeah, I think I'd second everything Stephen said. I think also, I guess to get involved with when it actually comes to drafting the code, and with the actual wording of the key pieces of code, and just to let the people drafting the design code know what would be some absolutely key wins in terms of public health that can be secured through planning, and to help out with some wording and some evidence to support that, and just come back to think about some, as I say, some key tangible wins, and just promote those, and help get those in the code so that they're going to be viable and deliverable.
Thanks for that. Well, we have come to our allotted hour, so can I take an opportunity to give a load of thanks to our speakers today, to Katya, to Matt, Stephen, and Charlie. Really appreciate you taking the time to give those presentations. We will be disseminating the slides and the recording of today's presentation. And there's quite a lot of links that people have been putting into the chat. So huge thanks to our speakers and for everyone who's joined us on the call today. And have a good rest of your day. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, bye.
Stay on for a second.